Hello, welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to explore a question a viewer asked: how do I find my pens? Well, the easiest answer is I search on eBay. I follow Bobby Pen or school supplies pen or office supplies pen. I also have been getting a lot of good input from Instagram. A lot of people post pictures of pens. And this is where I first saw this pen. Took me a while to find it on eBay, and then took me a while to decide to pull the trigger on it. Comes in this box. Those stylistic, I'm assuming they're Chinese characters. The first one translates as pill, and as we look at this pen, we'll understand why that might be the case. There's a little flaw in the packaging. Maru Pen Stationery. I can't find a real reference to that. Maru Pen appears to relate to nibs used to draw magna. So let's just slide this open, and we see the pen. And it looks as good as I expected it to look based on the auction. Here's the auction. A number of people are selling pens like this. When you take the pen out of its little protection and you unscrew the cap, about 2 turns, you'll see a glass nib. That's interesting. You know, the cap screws to post. Reminds me of the Moon Man Wancai, which came in much different kinds of acrylic, and we'll compare that pen a little bit later on. This unscrews, and it is a unit. Takes a lot of turns to get it out. And one of the things that you'll notice right away is there's no feeder hole. I mean, this is a dip nib, a dip glass nib. That's all it is. But do not fret. There is more to what meets the eye. We lift up this, and we find inside here a plastic sleeve with 2 nib units. One's an extra fine bent nib, and one's just an extra fine nib. They both have a little bit of bend to them. Well, interesting to see how they both work. And they'll just screw into that section. So without further discussion, we're going to clean this up and see how it looks. We have some interesting light coming in. This is called Autumn, I think. And it does relate to, you know, acrylics that we've seen in PENBBS pens. So maybe this came from a similar location. I heard they come from Taiwan. But it's really nice. The section is made out of the same material. You know, the whole pen is made out of that material, which is very nice. I really like that. I think it adds, to me, it adds to the visual properties of the pen, and it certainly is a nice looking pen as we get some good light on there. And as you can see, as light comes in at different angles, you're going to get different chatoyancy, different reflections back through the materials, and that just can keep you amused, at least can keep me amused for hours. One of the things I was not prepared for is this came from Korea. Not from China, as the eBay auction indicated, but it arrived relatively quickly. Here's the order and shipping, and it was delivered today, which is the 19th of October. Oh, sorry, today's the 18th of October. So that was pretty interesting. So we've had now Chinese pens that have been somehow packaged and shipped to United States, and then from there the shipping label looks like it was shipped inside the United States, and now we get something coming from Korea, and I've also gotten stuff from Malaysia. So those that follow the news, you may see that they're proposing or preparing to repeal the China Post relationship with the United States Post Office, which lets them ship goods very inexpensively, which lets us buy a 99-cent pen and get it delivered without any shipping costs. So our current administration wants to get rid of that. And it's going to take a year, but I'm certain that'll have an impact on it. But they'll just ship from other countries. There'll be many ways, I think, to continue to get great pens at great prices with minimal shipping costs. When I ordered this pen, it asked me what I wanted for my extra nib, and I said a medium. But as you can see here, both of these nibs are marked extra fine. One's a Marupu stationary nib, and the other is a Delike nib. But they're both a little bent, and it looks like the Marupu nib is bent a little bit more, so I would guess that that's what they're calling their medium nib. And the other one is an extra fine bent, so it'll be interesting to see how both of these write. I'm going to start off with the Marupu nib because that's looks like it'll be more to my liking, but I might like both of them. You may say that, boy, does that acrylic color look familiar, and I'll say yes. It is the same as the autumn color here we have in the PENBBS 267, which is number 28 in the PENBBS model numbering system, the second digits that represent the color of the acrylic. The first sets of digits represent the model. So you have your yellow, your green, your red, reminiscent of the color of fall leaves, very prominent in the East Coast of the United States where I live. So what's different between these acrylics? The PENBBS pen has that strong acrylic odor, which a number of PENBBS pens have, not all. But interestingly, the glass pen has no odor whatsoever. So maybe the acrylic has aged more, or maybe they have some treatment that actually removes the odor. A mystery to me. And here's that same autumn color in the 308/266 model. This one has a lot more green in it. The red is redder, and the yellow is not quite as yellow. So there are variations in these acrylics, which makes them interesting and fun, so no two pens are going to look the same. So some of you may not have any experience with glass nibs, and it's not something I have a lot of experience with, but I did buy some inexpensive glass nib dip pens from China. They came and they were much smaller than I expected, and they've all broke. But I used them for my ink samples. So what's nice is we're going to take this Robert Oster ink, $10 green. And what you do is you just take the pen and dip it in the ink just to cover that glass nib, and I also get off the excess, and the ink goes into those little grooves in the nib section. I mean, as a glass nib, this works about as good as any. It's a very large size, larger than I think a lot of glass nibs, at least that I've seen. So it is smooth. And with that one dip, my guess is you could write maybe 3 or 4 sentences before you're going to have to redip it. But just for those that may not have used glass nibs, the other thing that you find is the first time you write with it, it's wetter and it gets drier and drier, as obviously that ink in the nib, it gets deplenished. It also has to flow down from those grooves down to the nib, so that creates a little bit of a time flow, and I think you could probably run this dry. Looks like it's getting close to being dry now. But that's how they work, and like I say, to me, What I'll use this for is my ink tests where I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of ink. So I just dip the nib, write some sample writing, maybe do a smear, and then easily clean the nib by just dipping it in water, wiping it off, and then going on to the next ink. Well, the obvious pen to compare it to is the Moonman Wancai, or pill pen as the Chinese translates to. But it is longer by a good 18 millimeters by the eye. The Moonman is also a thicker pen, so it does have a couple different variations to it. The cap unscrews, about 1.5 turns. That's what it looks like posted. I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit. Less turns on the Moonman Wancai, and that's how it looks. So even posted, it's longer by about the same amount of length. Both of these pens are very beautiful, very pretty. I enjoy this. It's like a smog version, they call PENBBS's version of that acrylic. The section is also very different. This is a smaller section, a little bit longer. This is a little bit greater diameter. So to me, I found the Wancai a very comfortable pen to use. I mean, I've had this pen inked up for many, many months. I've carried it around in my pocket, my case, and I did clean out a little bit of ink in the cap, but considering how this pen has been knocked around and abused, that is excellent for any pen. So they really did an excellent job. This time will tell on how well this other pen, glass pen, whatever you want to call it, doesn't seem to have a particular brand name. Here's a close of those sections and the nib. So I put in the extra fine that I think is their equivalent of a medium into the pen. I put about a little bit less than 2 milliliters of ink into the barrel, and that filled it up as much as I'm comfortable with. I think the Wancai will take a little bit more ink because of the greater diameter. But they're both number 5 nibs, and Wancai writes very, very well. I haven't had any desire to replace it, so let's see how well the Maripou pen works. So I inked up the pen. I put some silicone grease on the threads of the section, screwed it back together, and it wrote after a minute or two. I didn't time it. I was busy doing some photography. So it is a very nice size pen when it's screwed on to post. That section is on the small side, but it's a light pen. We compared those weights against the Moonman Wancai. So let's see how this Meru pen extra fine bent nib writes. It writes nice, smooth, and I did just do a little bit of micro mesh on it. It had a little bit of tooth to it, and just a few swipes on micro mesh got rid of it. I just wanted it to write nicely, and it was an easy thing to do. All of us should understand how to use micro mesh. It's easy. So I think this writes well. So let's do a rating. I'm going to give it an 8.7. The reasons for that is it's a little on the small side, and yes, it's beautiful acrylic, and yes, it's a nice eyedropper, and it does have a decent nib, but that section is just on the small side, and I think that degrades the writing experience, at least from my perspective. It's a little bit long, which is not necessary. So we need to compare it to me, the standard bearer of these pill pocket pens. And this nib is much smoother. And I think it's a great wetness. Get near the bottom of the page, so it's a little bit more difficult to write over the camera. So I don't know whether I rated this one, but if I was to rate the Wancai, I'd give it a 9.3. It served the test of time. It's a great nib. It looks beautiful. I love that section. It's just a perfect size for me. A little flare out the bottom is also nice. I like that because you really feel your position. Both of these pens have a pretty big step up because they're, you know, the cap and barrel meet on the outside, but I don't notice that step up at all. So you might ask, how does the glass nib and the extra fine bent nib compare? The glass nib does lay down a lot more ink through initial dipping. Even though the Marabou pen, and this was before I did a little bit of smoothing on it, so now they're both equally smooth. And I thought it wasn't as wet from the way the ink looked on it, but when I made my schmear, it certainly did look wetter. But then this was towards the end of the glass nib, and that's one of the challenges with the glass nib is the amount of ink it lays down is going to vary a lot from the first dip till the time it gets pretty low on ink that you need a second dip. But it's a comparable line size. The glass nib is a little bit wider. I just thought you'd find that interesting. So we've come to the end of this video, and I mean, I'm happy about the pen, but I expected more of a Wancai style and less of a different style, but I guess they did their own pen. And it's nice, but it just doesn't ring my bell like the Wancai does. This is probably a pen I'll empty out of ink and put aside to admire. I'm not going to put in the Delike extra fine bent nib. I've tested a lot of those and used those a lot. So hopefully you've enjoyed this look at a pen you may have seen on eBay. The auction may have been confusing because you saw the glass nib, but it comes with other nibs, so don't be concerned about that. So thank you for watching. And I used the same Robert Oster $10 green ink in all of these tests. In the Wancai, it's the Irishizuku Sinju, the green ink. So may you have many great writing experiences. Enjoy putting ink on paper, putting your thoughts down on paper, sharing your thoughts with others, or just reading them later for your own enjoyment. So this is the end of this video. Until the next time, bye. Nice green ink.